Hi, I'm Michael Patrick Cullinane. I'm professor of history in the Loman Walton Chair in Theodore Roosevelt Studies at Dickinson State University. I'm delighted that the Morris Collection is here at DSU. It really sets the university apart as one of the leading institutions for scholarship and research into Theodore Roosevelt's life and times.
Chris O'Brien. I'm the director of the Theodore Roosevelt Center at Dickinson State University, and we couldn't be more happy to have the Edmund and Sylvia Morris collection here.
Hi, I'm Susan Sarna. I am the senior curator of collections for the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library.
Welcome, Sue. Welcome, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here talking to you about the Edmund and Sylvia Morris collection. And Sue, I want to start with you and just ask, how did this come to DSU via the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library? And how did Edmund and Sylvia Morris keep all of these documents?
Anthony, their nephew, was really the caretaker of the collection. And I guess he was down in their different basement, the attic, and their study with Sylvia and looked over it all before after Edmund passed away. And Sylvia, I guess, discussed everything with him, so he had a lay of the land, so to speak. After Sylvia passed, then, the collection, he then went and collected the entire collection. It was in different places. It was in boxes in the attic. It was in filing cabinets. And it was in Edmund and Sylvia's order. And he tried to preserve that order as best he could. But when you put it in a box, you kind of lose some of the order because there were 30 folders and only 20 could fit in a box. So he preserved the order as best as possible, and then he put it in storage, and the TRPL, the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library, was fortunate enough to get the collection, and I met Anthony, and he went through the whole thing with me, describing how he did it, how he packed it up, and he was following their wishes that they had wanted it to be preserved, and in entirety. So the entire collection, not just on Theodore Roosevelt, not just Sylvia, the entire collection together. And so we packed it up and we brought it here to the Theodore Roosevelt Center where we knew the best archives were.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment, the archives, because Edmund and Sylvia were not professional archivists, they were writers.
Yes.
Right. So keeping and maintaining an archive is a tricky thing. And I mean, obviously you have the skills, the archivists at the TR Center have the skills. How do you take a collection of papers that was amateurs were holding and trying to arrange, and then make it something that is a professional archive and searchable collection?
Well, it's interesting because Edmund definitely had, we can tell from looking it over, he definitely had an arrangement and an order. Sylvia did not as much, but just because she didn't have an order as an archivist, you still cannot change. It has to stay the way it is. So our first project that we are doing after we put it into safe boxes is to actually now put it into archival folders. Once we know it's sound and everything is safe and it won't rot, there's no damage, there's no water damage, we take off all the clips, then we can start writing a finding aid. And our finding aid will be based on the way the original collection came to us in the order that they had.
So Chris, how excited are you to really this collection?
So the team is thrilled. We don't have very many physical collections here, as you know. We have some that we've collected over time, but this is the first large, substantial collection, and certainly of two authors, where we're seeing the work of lifetimes, right? The organization. And for folks who did Masters in Library and Information Sciences, as a couple of our folks did, the idea that you could take what is effectively raw material and make sense of it, right? To go through and preserve it and have the opportunity to be the person who's creating, by recreating, I suppose, that structure and help people have access to it. We don't get a chance to do that very often. They are absolutely thrilled. This is great. In fact, the collection's been here for now 4 or 5 days, and we have a hard time getting them to go home at night. So it's been absolutely great, and couldn't do it without our partners, right? Couldn't do it without the TRPL and the trust that they put in them, and the trust they put in Eric and Kelly and William and the folks who are here to do this work. So
we've been looking through this a little bit now.
Right.
As you say, the last 4 or 5 days, and so we have a little bit of a sense of how Edmund and Sylvia worked on their biographies. So let's talk a little bit about the index cards, because this is something that I don't do. Most of my work is in the digital world. I think most of our work is now in the digital world. But they were old school researchers that wrote out their notes on index cards.
Great. Like me.
So what's interesting is, what we found is, what's great about this is, it's not just online. You can actually see the way their handwriting is, how it progressed, how their research progressed. So Sylvia, when she first starts doing research, we've already discovered her first book on Edith Kermit Roosevelt was done just on paper.
Mm-hmm.
Her second big book on Clare Boothe Luce, she did index cards. So she developed a different system. And
She probably learned from Edmund, I guess, too,
and
right?
that's really important
Yeah.
on their looking to see their development and how they changed their research patterns throughout the year. That's all part of learning about them and how they did things. And that's why having this whole collection together is just so fascinating, because we can learn so much more than just what we learn in their index cards about Clare Boothe Luce, about Theodore Roosevelt, about Edison, about Beethoven. We're learning about their entire process and how they came to be. So that really is exciting.
Well, let's draw on one of those stories, because you and I have been talking about one of the things that was in her book about Edith Kermit Roosevelt, which was, she talks about verifying that her husband, Theodore, as a young boy, was in a picture. So I think the picture is there, Sue.
Yep.
And that's of Lincoln's funeral procession in New York, and that's his grandfather's house in New York. And the circle there, the red circle, two little specks. So how do we verify that that is indeed Theodore Roosevelt and Elliott Roosevelt? And it turns out that we're sort of getting to the bottom of it. We're not quite there yet, because we've not done all the due diligence. But I mean, how exciting to you is this, that we're starting to uncover some of the questions that we didn't have the answers to?
Yeah, and especially since Michael, you and I have been discussing this over and over again for probably the past year.
Years, yeah.
Saying, and you're like, we can't verify it. So looking through these things, it's just so, Sylvia's papers, it was so exciting to find a letter from Stephen Laurent saying, it was a pleasure meeting you, and I'm so glad I got to tell you the story, got to visit you, this is to Edith, and telling the whole story about the two little boys, and Edith telling him who they were, and that. But now, in Edith's book, she does talk, Sylvia does mention that the two little figures were Elliot and TR, but she cites it at the end just saying a letter. We didn't know where that letter was. We now found that letter.
Well, and the power of this for me is that the TR Presidential Library is being designed and developed as we speak. And so this is, this research is going to actively shape the way that museum looks. And that is really exciting. We're kind of bringing history to the public through what is going to be certainly one of the most exciting Theodore Roosevelt sites in a very long time. It's really going to be a major hub for scholarship and showing off this scholarship. So that's exciting.
Yes, definitely. And then we found another map that Edmund wrote himself about the Midnight Ride.
Right.
Through from Albany to
from North Creek, the train station, down to Albany, and then over to Buffalo. Yeah, and you can kind of see the gears in his head turning as he was a doodler, and so we've got his diaries. We've got great doodles in them, and he was also, what you can see is he's a really interdisciplinary person, really into music. So he writes, music scores in his notes, and yeah, he's a fascinating.
Yeah, most authors would have had somebody else come in and illustrate that. He illustrated the map himself.
Right.
And then has comments all in it. And that's first-hand account you cannot find anywhere else but in his works here. So it's just fascinating.
Chris, you found something interesting in the scrapbooks.
Oh, so the scrapbooks are actual scrapbooks, right? They're cards and invitations to parties, and within these scrapbooks, which are painfully hard to preserve. They are just commercial scrapbooks, and they're things that are sort of tucked in there, sometimes glued in, sometimes taped in, sometimes just randomly laying there. There were a handful of things, because of the number of books that Edmund did, the collections and the invitations sort of followed his writing life, right? So you could see where he had been invited to various dinners and things. But one of my favorite little bits is that they didn't throw away anything. As near as I can tell, this is an entire life full of Christmas cards and invitations, and you can see them rising from being poor, real live, actively writer poor, through enormous success in life. And you can just kind of trace their lives as writers and as literary celebrities through that. It's a way into people's lives that I throw away all my Christmas cards. I never would have thought to do such a thing.
That's such a good point. When you read their stuff now, I feel like it takes on a different tone.
Right.
Because going through their lives, we now are understanding maybe why or how they wrote something.
Right.
As opposed to before, just seeing it just the way it was written. Now, it takes on a different tone.
Right, and the letters to publishers about what they're trying to sell. I mean, the jobs that Edmund took that he felt were really beneath him. I mean, advertising, he worked in advertising for a few years, and you know, the stories of him and his diaries being on the unemployment line, as you point out.
Right.
So all of this just, you know, and the flourish that he has with his writing. I write a diary, but I just write what I've done from day to day, you know, went out to dinner tonight, that's kind of it. Edmund has a flourish where he talks about the New York skyline like a string of pearls on a necklace.
And I keep comparing it to when T.R. writes about when he hunts.
Yes.
And he describes every cloud in the sky, and Edmund did that too in his diary. They actually had a bit in common when it came to that. And I feel like Edith and Sylvia had a bit in common too.
So one of my favorite other things that's a comparison with TR for Edmund is that he writes back to his reviewers and critics.
Yes.
And he's not nice to them.
That's great.
Yeah, and TR occasionally wrote a less than gentle letter.
Stinging review.
A stinging review to those who were less than fond of his work. So it's nice to see, and it's nice to be able to compare someone who wrote the trilogy that helped many people come into the world of TR, right? Pulitzer Prize winning. There are so many things in here, right, that it's really important to think about this moment and the process that comes with it. And part of that is just the ongoing effort to convert what is raw documents into something that's usable for researchers and usable for the public and available. And that's a process that requires effort and, to be honest, expense, right?
Right.
So there is this moment where we have to think ahead about what comes and reach out to folks and say that, you know, we're always looking for a bit of help. And for us at the TRC, we're also in the midst of some updates here. We're updating a website. We'll have a new way for volunteers to help. And so there's a chance coming in the next few months, if everything clicks together right, for folks to get their hands on helping us with this process. But, you know, we're interested in help in every way that is meant, right?
That's great, and there's one person that we should thank in all this, and this is the person who made the gift possible, and that's Mark Brinkmeyer and his wife Vicky, who we are very grateful for their generosity, because this is really down to them and their support.